Good afternoon and welcome to our community dialogue brought to you by the Herald and Nelson Mandela University's Canrad. We have got a good one in store for you all this afternoon as we discuss the topic coalition governments in Nelson Mandela Bay over the last 5 years. Participatory democracy or a hindrance to progress? I am Rochelle de Kock. I'm editor of the Herald newspaper based in Gqeberha, and I will be your host this afternoon. I'd like to start off by introducing our panel who will be discussing this topic today. Joining us this afternoon to discuss it is Jolene Kotze. She's the Chief Research Specialist in Democracy and Citizenship at the Human Science Research Council. Good afternoon, Jolene. We also have Athol Trollip. We all know him as former mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay and a seasoned politician. We have Councillor Lance Grootboom. He is a Nelson Mandela Bay councillor and representative of the ACDP in the Bay Council. Also joining us is Mr. Thabo Matuane. He is the Eastern Cape MPL and chair of the Portfolio Committee for Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, COCTA in short. And we've got Johan Mettler, who is an administrator at a municipality currently, but for those of you who are here, we all would know him very well as the former city manager of Nelson Mandela Bay. And last but not least, we have the mayor of the city of Ekurhuleni that will be joining us, Councillor Mzwandile Masina. Thank you all for joining us, and I'm really looking forward, to have you part of this conversation today. But before we kick things off, I'd like to encourage all our audiences that are watching. If you could please send in questions in the comment section and any comments that you might have for some of our speakers. Those are things that we will tackle at a later stage this afternoon. So let's get started. We know the 2016 local government election saw power changing hands in 4 metropolitan municipalities, forcing the formation of coalitions in order to govern those municipalities. Now, I'd like for us to all just maybe take, a few years back, 5 years to be exact. And it's 3 days after the 2016 local government elections. It's August 6th, and by that time, it was very clear that voters in key metros in the country have booted out the ANC from an outright power for the first time in post-democracy, save for the city of Cape Town, of course. In Nelson Mandela Bay, the DA has the upper hand, having obtained 57 seats in the council. It needed 4 seats to have an outright majority. The lobbying of small parties begins on the side of both the DA and the ANC. And what later follows is the formation of a new coalition government to lead the Bay, as well as the city of Joburg, Tshwane, and Ekurhuleni. I'd like to start off first by talking to you, Mr. Trollip. When this lobbying, as I mentioned just now, when that lobbying of parties started, what were the key issues that were placed on the table? And did you first discuss a common purpose, ideals, or was it first a matter of positions before anything else was discussed?
Good afternoon, Rochelle, and good afternoon to the other panelists and any participants. Look, I think the 2016 election was a very exciting election. There was anticipation that change was coming, and especially in the metros, there was a feeling that the ANC had let voters down and people were anticipating change. So there was some discussion and planning around coalition governments, very new in South Africa. There have been a number of them, but they are relatively new, so to speak, in governance. And there was some cursory planning, but there wasn't enough planning. Through personal experience, I realized that we went to look for coalition governments, and we weren't always aligned politically. We were aligned by one thing, that we wanted to get rid of the ANC governments in Nelson Mandela Bay and the other municipalities. But there wasn't necessarily alignment across all coalition partners about policies and where we wanted to go in local government. And I think that's something that can be done much better. My enemy's enemy isn't always my friend. And I think many of our coalitions were set up in that background, was that our enemy's enemy was our friend. And we were soon sobered by that fact when, within 2 months of our coalition, things started falling apart because some of our coalition partners were more interested in power and access to patronage through power. And for example, one of the coalition promises I made in my campaign was that if I became the mayor, I would stop corruption. And within 2 months, it was quite clear that Mr. Bobani from the UDM was only interested in corruption. And when the city manager and I started putting our foot down to some of these antics, within 2 months, he wasn't voting with us in the coalition. And that didn't really make for a very good coalition partner. And we had to just go from one chaotic council meeting to the next, trying to get things done, and our coalition partner wasn't voting with us. So I learned then that one would need to do much better planning and make sure there was proper alignment. I think one of the biggest challenges in South Africa is we've got so many political parties. And when you don't have an outright majority and you have a hung council, you've got to go and look for support from some of those parties that might only have 1, 2, or a few seats. And then they believe that they have kingmaker status, which they actually do have. But they believe that that status gives them a lot more power than they actually should have. You know, Rochelle, anything that has a head and a body and a tail is never successful if it's led by the tail. And if I can give you an example of that, Angela Merkel has probably been the most successful chancellor in Germany's modern history. And she's been the leader of a coalition government for 16 years. Everybody knows that it's a CDU-led coalition government. Everyone knows in the world that that government is led by Angela Merkel. But in South Africa, for some strange reason, the smaller political parties that make up coalition partners believe that they are equal partners. They're not equal partners. If you get 47 seats in one council, or 57 seats and 47%, you cannot be equal to a party that has 1 seat. What you are equal in is that you become a partner in that government to make the government work, but you cannot have equal status. It's physically impossible to have that. And apart from the shenanigans of Mr. Bobani, who was not a genuine coalition partner, all he wanted was power. Right from the beginning, it was clear that he wanted to be deputy mayor and he wanted the position of mayoral committee member for public health, where he could control tenders. It was very clear with that. Our other coalition partners, we had great cooperation. And when our coalition fell apart, they didn't just fall into the next coalition like Mr. Bobani did. There was principle and policy alignment, which I think is fundamental to good coalition.
Yeah, it's interesting that, you say that, and you mention, just 2 months, into the coalition, the cracks started to show. I mean, it's well documented. You spoke about Councillor Bobani and the whole issue with the public health officials and the Milongani contract and so on. Those are things that are out in the public domain. But were there any specific matters that you were butting heads over, earlier on within the 2 months, as you mentioned?
Thank you, Rochelle. Yeah, I think that's a very important question because we personally knew all about Bobani at a local level. But when we engaged in coalition agreements, we engaged at party leadership level. And the various party leaders all made commitment that we would observe this coalition agreement that we had. Obviously, Bobani was never part of that agreement. It was with Bantu Holomisa and the other coalition parties' leaders like Kenneth Meshwe and Terra Lakota and various others. So Bobani was never committed to that agreement, and in fact, he broke every single provision of that agreement. And every time we had meetings, and Lance is aware how many of those meetings we had, the UDM just refused to do anything about Bobani. And that's when the coalition started falling apart, because if a coalition is stitched together by national leadership should have a defining role in what the behavior of those participating parties should be, but the UDM didn't. Johan Metler will remember well that the first instance was just before Christmas in December, when he wanted the city manager to pay a commission to one of his friends who was an attorney in town for doing some work for the municipality. The city manager refused to pay that person. Bobani came to see me and insisted that we pay this guy. And I said, well, we're a municipal council. We're not a real estate business. We don't pay commission. And he lost his rag right there and then. And then I realized that all he was doing was trying to facilitate payments. Milongani Eco Consulting was just probably the tip of the iceberg, because it was the contract that we started pursuing Bobani through, and Lance became the mayoral committee member for health, and he saw what a mess there was there. But there were many other. There was a waste to energy project that Mr. Bobani was heading up with one of his other guys, Jerome Scosano, who was also subsequently been arrested. It was a R1 billion project, and Mr. Bobani was desperate to put this project through council, and we were going to be funded by the Development Bank of South Africa. But when he didn't want to meet with the Development Bank of South Africa officials and his own departmental officials, we realized that there was chaos. And that's really where these coalitions fall apart, where you get individuals who believe that their position in a coalition will give them access to power, and once they have that power, they can start dispensing patronage. We saw the same thing with Marlon Daniels. All he wanted to do was become the deputy mayor, by hook or by crook. And when that didn't happen, he just flopped from one coalition to the next and sold each coalition out to the next highest bidder. And once it becomes horse trading about who's the highest bidder, well, your coalition will never last. Maybe those that did last were prepared to pay the highest bidder. I wasn't.
Yeah. I would like to actually just move over to Lance. Lance, if you could maybe just talk to us about your experience as a minority partner in a coalition. And I'd like to specifically ask you, when decisions, were taken, are these first canvassed with you as coalition partners, or is it a given and an understanding from the word go that you're a minority coalition partner, and therefore, as Ethel says, you cannot have the tail wagging the dog? Is that something that you'd like to just talk us through?
Yes, thanks, Rochelle. Rochelle, to me, coalitions, what makes them very, different, and I think what is important about them is when you partner with a coalition partner, whether it's the bigger party partnering with the smaller party, it's values that becomes important. If you just get in bed with any partner, you are going to pick up problems. And to me, for coalitions to succeed, you need to make sure that the partners that you are partnering with, you have the same values. And obviously, political parties have different ideological beliefs, and there are going to be differences. But I think on a local level, the issues are not so much ideological. It is more operational. And I think there it's just a matter of the bread and butter issues of getting the services done. Now, I slightly disagree with Trollop when he says about smaller parties might not, and they play a significant role. Yes, maybe the power might be not the power, the percentage of votes they receive might be a difference. But what is important is that nobody won an outright majority, and that's why there's a coalition like in Nelson Mandela Bay. Budgets cannot be passed if you don't have a majority. You need to have your partners with you. Decisions that is important that seeks a majority, you need that in order to get it through. So whether you're the bigger party or not, you would not be able to pass anything. In fact, you would not even to move the ship because you don't have an outright majority. So coalitions are bringing that, and that's why you form that partnership in order to govern together. That's why there can't be one where there's for example, a DA-led. It can't be led by one party. Yes, the mayor may be coming from a bigger party, like in Ethel's case, but that doesn't mean that we are led by this bigger political party. Everything we do is in consultation. And consultation becomes key and it becomes important. Just making an example, when there was trouble with the relationship, with Bobani and the coalition, it was uncomfortable for all of us. We could see we could not make decisions. We could see the things that we were standing for because before the coalition was formed, there was a discussion at the national level. And the discussion was looking at what is our manifesto saying? What are we saying to the residents? And basically out of that, we saw that most of us were saying the same thing. So going into a government, that is what we're going to do. But when we got there with Babani, it was a different case. No, but what was important is that it was not the DA deciding, let's get rid of Babani. It was the coalition deciding together, the other partners, that says, listen, you've got one partner that is not pulling his weight, is not aligning with what we are standing for, and as a result, we can't work together. So that is, to me, so it boils down to values. It boils down, obviously, to negotiations. And yes, you're going to get the odd ones. And I think Ethel pointed out right, that you will have somebody, for example, like when Marlon Daniels was with us, to him, it was all about the position. You will have that. And you will have a coalition partner trying to push his way, thinking that he's got all the power and all that. But like I said, that boils down once again to values. Values to me is very important. So a coalition is good for democracy, and it's not a hindrance. That's what I believe. Just make an example, the ACDP. Nobody would have known what the ACDP can do to a directorate if they haven't got an opportunity to govern something like public health. It would have always been silent. People would have never been seen that. They would have never knew. But now they've seen, the smaller parties, there are those ones that can actually govern and can make a difference, like what is happening in public health. I believe we've brought about a change. But what I'm trying to say is, collectively, if you look at our current coalition that we currently in now, it's mostly the same partners that has been consistently, like your COPE, your ACDP, that had a good relationship with the DA then, and we had a good relationship. We worked together. So your question on when we made decisions, yes, we make decisions together. That's why we had a coalition management committee. And on that management committee, we will discuss issues and we will try to resolve those issues there. And if there's disagreements, there was a way of escalating that to our national leaders. And the national leaders would obviously guide us, as to what we should do. So basically, there was a system in place, obviously, to resolve disputes and issues and to come to an agreement on certain items. So that's the approach, and that is still the approach today, even in the current coalition that we have.
Thanks, Lance. And Lance, I want to just go back to something that you touched on, and it's the mention of a DA-led coalition. I know that that's been a little bit of a thorny one for yourself. It played out actually on our letters pages recently, where you took issue with the DA taking credit for some of the improvements in the public health department. I want to actually ask you this. Do you find at all that your voice as the ACDP and your identity as the ACDP is not swallowed up by the bigger parties in this partnership?
Yeah, definitely. When I started, when the coalition started in 2016, for the first 6 months, I could see that happening. I could see that it's going to swallow up. I obviously studied a little bit of what happened in Cape Town. Now, in Cape Town, in 2003, the ACDP put the DA into power there through a coalition and with other partners. And what happened is that the ACDP had a lot of seats then. They even had the deputy mayor position there. But at the next elections, they were gone. The DA took out the majority at the next elections. And the ACDP was silenced. They were dead. There was no voice. There was nothing. So obviously, I didn't want that to happen here because we are independent. We're running different parties. We got different ideological beliefs and all those things. And I didn't want it to silence that. So at the beginning, I could feel that pressure for the first 6 months. And I think through the 5 years that I've been in council now, I've learned that the only way to make sure you keep the brand, you keep the independence of the party, is to communicate that effectively to the residents and to the people, and making that known to your partners. Because when we got back now, we signed a new coalition agreement and nobody was allowed to call themselves DA-led or ACDP-led. It was actually just a coalition government. And that is how it should have been communicated. And I think even the media then, we should have obviously communicated that to the media then, that because it was new to us, and when the media were writing story, it was always about the DA-led. And obviously that is what silenced the partner, because people will think you are led by a different political, but you're not led. I mean, I'm not led by, the decisions I currently make in public health are all policies that I'm implementing from the ACDP there. And the Mayor Banga is not influencing that. And even when Ethel was there, we worked together, we ironed out things. When there was ideas, we shared those ideas. Most of the time, we had the same policy position on some of the stuff. We implemented them together. For example, when Ethel implemented, just make an example, illegal dumping task force. It was on our manifesto, it was on their manifesto, and it was no problem to implement the task force because that is what we needed to fight illegal dumping, those things. But there's consultation and that approach. But the overall running of a directorate, to me, and that's where it becomes important. When a coalition partner runs a directorate, that is what he takes to the voter or to his residents or to his constituency to say, listen here, this is all what ACDP has done in terms of governance. Although the legislation doesn't make provision for that. Remember, the mayor, we report to the mayor in terms of legislation, and he appointed us in terms of legislation to those portfolios. But in a coalition, it is a little bit different, although we follow the process. But at the end of the day, whatever happens in public health, or happens in whatever, if that coalition partner runs that, then that's where it's failing, then it shows a little bit of the governance of that specific, party within the coalition. But like I said, we're supposed to help each other. We're supposed to pick up because we're supposed to govern together. So whether the directorate is not succeeding, it affects the whole coalition, because it's actually the coalition that has to go back to the residents and say, listen, yeah, this is what we've done. Because, Rochelle, just people, when you look at people, when they voted, they voted for people to perform. They don't care what you're doing there. They put you there for the reason of performing. So whatever you represent there, they want to see service delivery. And I think as a coalition government, that should be the focus. We need to put our parties aside and maybe just push one agenda of actually building the city and serving the people.
Thanks, Lance. Thank you so much. And I would just actually like to bring in Mr. Mettler here at this point. As the warring parties, as the parties were fighting amongst each other, over the years, we started to see that the city's administration was beginning to suffer. At the time, meetings could not proceed due to lack of quorum. Parties were flipping and flopping, depending on, the decision or the topic of the day. And at the end of it all was the administration that was waiting for decisions to be taken to get service delivery moving. And that is where you come in, Mr. Mettler. I'd like to maybe just bring you in here for you to talk about your experience as an administration head working with the coalition government at the time. Can you recall any specific incidents or instances where you could not move ahead with something because of council instability?
Thanks, Rochelle. Yes, indeed. It was quite a challenging environment. But let me start here. To manage a municipality or a metro for purposes of this discussion, that in itself is a challenging task. And I'm now talking just about delivering on the integrated development plan or the annual plan, which we call the service delivery budget, the budget implementation plan, is the BIP, as it is called. So that in itself is challenging because you're dealing with departments that must coordinate among each other. Finance and corporate must work together with, for example, public health, if there needs to be appointments or supply chain processes, etc. So that in itself is challenging. But when you throw in an unstable political environment, then you really set the cat among the pigeons. And it is very simple. A municipality is actually a straightforward affair. There is parties get elected on the basis of their manifestos. They make certain promises. The majority party, in this case the coalition, they then set about devising the integrated development plan, and they decide what are the important things that must happen, right? So you implement that plan. But there is also a certain rhythm that must be respected in the municipality. There's a certain time when that plan must be done. There's a certain time when the draft budget must be put on the table. There's a certain time when the budget must be passed. There's a certain time after the passing of the budget in the new financial year when the delivery plan must then also be passed. So if those things don't happen, so if those meetings don't happen, or if you have to worry whether a meeting will sit, whether a meeting will correct so that you can have a budget. Because remember, if you don't do these things, you pick up a non-compliance with the Auditor General. So often our discussions with myself and the mayor in our one-on-one sessions is this meeting going to happen? Or when are you going to come to me with what you now think is a deal that we can now put into the budget? You know, it becomes challenging when you reach a particular date. There is no draft budget on the table that you can legitimately take to council to say, please pass this so that we can consult on it, because you know that this thing that you have in your hand at that moment is going to be so vastly different from the final budget that you're going to have to go out on consultation again. And that really makes life very difficult. Now, that on the one hand. On the other hand, you know, when you have a political environment that is so contested, and if I say contested, that is a very diplomatic term that I am using. And there was one stage, you remember that meeting on the 27th of August, where I couldn't sit in my chair because of the broken shards of glass. That was there. I had to sit in front, there where the secretariat would sit. So when you have meetings like that, or meetings that are so politically contested that you know and already ask the speaker beforehand to excuse the senior managers, because for senior managers to sit in a meeting for the whole day when nothing gets discussed and there's just political mayhem, that in itself is an absolute waste. So there was a period, and I think a very long period since when I was there, that those managers were just excused, and we knew that there would not be questions because questions had to be in writing and so on. You know, so you start taking those kind of operational decisions, which should not be. All the senior managers should be in council to experience council, to see what the mood is like, to see how passionate people or councillors feel about a particular matter. So, you know, so from that perspective, it then becomes very difficult also to manage the political administrative interface. But now, in the normal course of events, it is already a challenge. And people have, accounting officers like myself, have bitten the dust in the normal course of events. Now you sit in a situation where any decision that the accounting officer makes gets a political taint. It is tainted in a political way because of how the outcome of that decision would be perceived. So that makes it very difficult to then maintain that distance between the political arm and the administrative arm. So often, our discussions would also be along the lines, but yes, you want to have certain things done, but how these things are done, that is the call of the administration. The what part, the outcomes, what you want to achieve, those are the political calls. And I firmly believe that politicians have a God-given right to make bad decisions as far as that is concerned. Our job is to implement it or to advise. But there must be that distance, firstly, and secondly, there must be that mutual respect for each other. But there must also be an understanding that there is good faith. That when I advise that you simply can't just insource 600 security staff. You can't just do that. There's a particular process that needs to follow. Then you expect the councillors to say, okay, please advise us how to go about it. But no. In Nelson Mandela Bay, that gets politicized. And then it gets picked up by the AG, and the rest is history. So yes, it's a challenging environment, but it tests relationships. It certainly has tested the relationship between myself and Ethel. He knows that. He would not always agree, but after our meetings, there would be an agreement as to this is what needs to happen, because he was the executive mayor after all, so he must carry the political can. He must go to his caucus and convince them that in how we're going to do things, he's been advised, and that's what's going to happen. And I take my cue from what needs to happen and put that into the plan. Thank you, Rochelle.
Yeah, we joke about it now, but we often talk at the office, and we say Mr. Mettler's downfall was when he used the words, "Councillor, that motion is incompetent," and then it was all downhill for your career in Nelson Mandela Bay thereafter. But I think just onto a serious note, I'd like to bring in Mr. Matiwane here from COCTA, from the COCTA committee. Mr. Matiwane, your role as the COCTA committee is obviously oversight over the department, but also municipalities. And I recall at a point in 2019, there was a report from your committee which recommended an intervention in the municipality by assuming some of the roles of the municipality. But there was just one sentence in this report, and it which was used to motivate this intervention. It read, "Here is the collapse of governance and functionality at Nelson Mandela Metro, and the council cannot fulfill its obligations in terms of the constitution or local government legislation." You said at the time that this was because the council could not appoint a CFO or hold council meetings. I'd like, please, Thabo, if you could just talk to us about your, and by extension, COCTA's attempts to intervene and provide support, really, to counter the instability in Nelson Mandela Bay. And if you did, in fact, provide any support.
Thank you very much, Rochelle, and good afternoon to you and other fellow panelists and those that are watching at home. Well, I think one of the observations that we made at the time about the new establishment at the City Hall was that the coalition itself, its major fault line was that it was not based on principle whatsoever. Thus, the principles of good governance and accountability, hence the UDM, Bobani and EFF fallout. And the second biggest fault line that we established as a committee was that there was a huge decline of expenditure, the compliance and meeting of deadlines. You would understand that local government is a highly regulated space of governance. There are certain timelines within which a council must do certain things. There are certain timelines within which the mayor must table Section 71 reports, Section 52 reports, the annual reports, the council must read annual reports at a particular period. There's a certain time that the municipality must submit financial management aspect of report to provincial treasury. On top of that, you had a challenge of bundling with regards to major appointments in the city at the time. You will recall that at the senior management level, the blunder was made just at the beginning of the coalition, upon the appointment of the city manager, which ended in the labor court, amongst other issues. Whatever that you want to do to make the municipality function, this municipality seems to be very intransigent. They don't want the intervention of government. They are very suspicious. And they're using every avenue available legally to stop the intervention and support of government from the province. You would know that the Constitution empowers Section 151, to a great extent, Section 153 of the Constitution gives the municipality certain powers within which a provincial or national government should not compromise or impede its ability to function on its own. On the basis of that, like some other municipalities, the city at the time of this coalition had to find its other way to stop whatever support that we wanted to do from the point of view of the executive council of the province. And we had no option at the portfolio committee at the time to say we are left with one option. Remember, the challenge is that we cannot allow this blackmailing of the ruling bloc by smaller parties to go unabated, because it's affecting our communities. And then the committee that I chair with then agreed that there must be intervention immediately. Suffice to say that intervention itself was met with a brick wall. Should I say a brick wall undertaking? There was a big iron curtain to the support that we said the province must do. As I said, there was some level of reluctance to accept an ANC executive council to come in. Notwithstanding what Trolip and the team at the time understood. Chapter 3 of the Constitution talks about cooperative governments, but they had to use every avenue available to ensure that they don't harness the support. Another biggest problem that you would have to examine during the course of the discussion, which ourselves as the committee did at the time, was that the role of the smaller parties, I think Lance has also alluded on this point, the role of the smaller parties in the coalition was based on the blackmail to the governing DA, on the issue that the DA should have principled on. And the biggest problem at the core of that is that when the DA would announce good stories, it does not get attributed to the coalition. And this thing became untenable. It was clear that there's on and off with regards to how communities should be serviced. And we felt that there must be immediate intervention because we could see that this is not going to go any further unless this coalition was established on principles. The other point, Rochelle, is that a weak coalition will not be able to spend money. I mean, Mr. Medler, the former city manager, makes this point. There are timelines within which administration is to be effective and efficient to submit certain reports. And the failure to meet those deadlines, that in itself is a break in the chain on their part. And the council has a right to ask them questions why certain matters have not been achieved. But in this case, you had a very weak coalition that could not do what was supposed to be done, wrong appointments, which is why we said there must be the last point I must make here. Again, the lack of principle breeds an environment where decisions about the future of the city were taken in a way that perpetuates the city along certain lines. Even smaller parties themselves in the coalition were not happy on how the majority party in the coalition undertakes certain decisions. I mean, we cannot sit as government, as a portfolio committee, when communities are not serviced. Remember, Rochelle, when the campaigning was happening, there was something I referred to as the mantra. The mantra was sold by the former mayor and his party, and everybody else bought into this mantra, including the media. But the biggest question, which was never asked, what is the principle within which this coalition is established? There was the buy-in. I mean, the DA said they will deliver services better, and anyone, they will end corruption, punish corruption, create jobs, and. There's a lot of things we can talk about. So I'm saying, against all these not happening, we felt that there was time that we should intervene to stop the bickering of the coalition, to ensure that something else is done to support the municipality to deliver. Remember, at the beginning, it was just a support that we wanted, 16154 to get in. Follow that. If that fails, we then said, and see, if everything fails, we'll have to examine what is available in law at your disposal as the Executive Council.
If I may just come in here, yeah. If I may just come in here, you touched on quite a couple of points, but there was some who argued, at the time that the ANC was failing in many municipalities it was leading. It is leading to run things, properly at a municipal level, and there wasn't proper cocktail intervention there. And then when it comes to Nelson Mandela Bay here, and I specifically remember when there was, and I'm talking about in about 2019, when there was disagreements between the ANC and the UDM, led by then late Mayor, he was then Mongameli Bobani. At the time, they were very much at odds with each other. And there was an argument by some that as COCTA, you were trying to use a more powerful arm of government to usurp power from the leading coalition that wasn't getting along here. What do you have to say to that? And I ask, the reason I mentioned is that some people argued at the time that the ANC wasn't intervening in municipalities, or let me put it this way, COCTA wasn't intervening in municipalities led by the ANC, which were doing badly in the rest of the Eastern Cape. And this was an attempt by the ANC to use a more powerful arm of government to take over power. What do you have to say to that?
Well, thank you very much. I think we would not buy into that. People say that, and in the main, the opposition in the province were saying this, and would not buy to a blackmail. The responsibility of government is to ensure that there's effective and functioning local government. And in this case, the Department of COCTA, which reports an account to us, which oversight, has to ensure that all municipalities they perform the responsibility bestowed on them to the best of their ability. And when we find that there are certain aspects of break in the chain of failures of fault lines, we call the department and say, intervene. It can't be true that on the basis that we wanted a department to intervene in the metro, therefore we were leaving other municipalities faltering. That is not the case. It's a blackmail that has been there. And we have municipalities where we have asked the department specific questions. What are you doing about municipality A and B? And they will provide answers. When the committee is not happy, we make that public to say the committee had an appearance of the department and we're not happy about how they accounted about the audit outcomes of certain municipalities, which are in perpetuity very on the red. We also mention a lot of things to say, you can't be doing this if you are to be a department that is intervening effectively and supporting. Because remember, the limitation as well here, Rochelle, is that whilst we are asking difficult questions as a portfolio committee to the department has limitation of intervening. And that intervention must first be agreed to by the municipality. And most of the municipalities, including this one, council, having all the powers of administrative and executing authority, they will object to that because they would argue against it or not in favor of a support intervention. So that limitation as well has to be understood. Up until you have to correct those blaring lines of how COCTA department intervenes and support municipalities with regards to what the Constitution bestowed powers has given original powers to municipalities to govern themselves. You will then have this problem of that.
Yeah, I'd like to just bring Jolene in here at this point.
not.
Oh. Sorry, Thabo, are we losing you there? Oh, apologies for that. I'd like to just bring Jolene in here into the conversation, but before I do,
I'd
like to
think that will be the.
Sorry, Thabo, your line is very unstable. We'll get back to you in a minute. I would just like to just move on quickly and mention that to our audiences who are watching, we have 25 copies of Jolene Steinkutz's book called Delivering an Elusive Dream of Democracy, Lessons from Nelson Mandela Bay. So it would be quite a treat, and I think it speaks specifically to the topic we're discussing today. And on that note, Jolene, I'd like to just bring you into the conversation here. Over these last 5 years, we've seen several coalition partners from different sides spend more time fighting over positions. I'm sure you've been watching it very closely, as we have too. This has led to, a matter of positions actually has led to coalitions either collapsing, MMCs being reshuffled to accommodate a new demand. Why does it seem that positions tend to take precedence over keeping a coalition intact when you would assume that parties would join forces because they have similar ideals?
I think it's a very interesting question, and watching the story of Nelson Mandela Bay unfold over the last 5 years, I think for me it speaks very much towards what one can call perhaps a political culture, perhaps an organizational culture within the municipality. When we start talking about issues of the political and administrative interface, when councils start becoming political theaters, these are not new problems that we have seen all of a sudden emerge in the context of coalition. I would actually like to go back further and go back towards the 2011 local government elections. And even if one goes back a bit further and you look at the ANC's infamous Polokwane conference, where Jacob Zuma was then elected as the ANC leader at that point in time. And kind of the rollback of those events on our local council and our local politics, where we spoke of political divides, Stalini versus stepping stones, for example. Council, again, becoming a political theater where, depending on which factional or where your loyalty lied to what faction, councillors would not go to meetings, budgets could not be passed, decisions could not be made. So the challenges, I think, that we have seen play out within the context of coalition actually has its roots a little bit deeper than just purely, oh, well, it is, the nature of a coalition. I think very importantly, and I was digging around for a little bit of data as well. We have just finished our 2020 and 2021 round of the South African Social Attitude Survey. It is a nationally represented survey that runs every year and has been for quite a number of years now. So when I started just briefly looking in terms of, who people voted for in the last municipal election, around 39% of the population indicated ANC, 15% indicated DA, 3% indicated EFF. We then asked, who will you vote for in the next election, which is, of course, our 2021 local government election? Answer there, ANC 37%, DA 16%, EFF 4%. So just by looking at what our current data shows, it would definitely seem that we are going to look at yet another situation where political parties are going to struggle to get an outright majority. The question then becomes, who are you going to partner with? Will you be having conversations before you are going to the polls? Will you be letting voters know that should we not get an outright majority, this is who we are going to partner with. This is our developmental agenda that we are going to follow. And as a coalition, we agree to advance service delivery ahead of the politics that may inform a coalition government.
And yeah, thanks, Jolene. And I think that speaks to what Ethel mentioned in the beginning about, there was not enough alignment of policies, and I think not enough discussion really about it ahead of time. though one understands no party goes into an election hoping to lose, but I think this is the reality of our future in South African politics. I would just like to talk a little bit about a little further afield, Ekurhuleni municipality. While every other metro that was running with the coalition battled to keep things together, and we saw mayors chopping and changing, Ekurhuleni Executive Mayor Zwandile Masina is the only metro mayor in a coalition to survive a full term. He recently released a book called Future Realities of Coalition in South Africa, Reflections on Coalition Governance in the Metros 2016 to 2021. In this book, he speaks about how coalition governments are a future reality in the country, and and Jolene, you touched on that. And this coalition in Ekurhuleni is a multi-party one that is made up of the AIC, PAC, PA, and the Independent Ratepayers Association of South Africa. Councillor Masina, welcome. And I would just like to ask you, perhaps you've got some advice for some of the parties that are going into the elections now. How were you able to make it work? No doubt there were some challenges, but how were you able to navigate those challenges and keep your coalition intact?
Thank you very much for this opportunity to participate in this debate. I think it's a very necessary debate that we must have in South Africa in order to ensure that we are able to preside over stable governance across the board. To come to your question, one of the things that we were able to do was to develop a clearly defined, well understood and commonly acceptable coalition agreement between parties. And we crafted the agreed upon the principles which underpin this coalition government. In our case, for instance, it was just two critical issues. One of them was the issue of service delivery. Another one was good governance. And thirdly, we avoided what I'm hearing from my former colleague, Trolip, like underhand dealings or people coercing you to the things that are not principled as explained by the former city manager. So we didn't have any other underhand dealings, and we avoided such discussion because they became uncomfortable in the main. Now, where we are, we think that coalition are the future in South Africa, and political parties must learn to understand who are their political opponents, who are those that are completely different ideologically in terms of the outlook, and begin to find ways in the interest of the community, because the voting patterns in South Africa no longer favor political parties, especially at local government level. So it's important that we understand. Now, when I took an opportunity to pen this book, I had two motions of no confidence against me by the DA, which both failed because they were not of substance. After those, I realized that it will be important for us to put together this historic moment in context so that everyone can understand, but also to just go out and to reach out to read other advanced nations, how they've looked into these issues as referred to even in this debate. So the book really is, for me, is a piece that begins to start the conversation that South Africans and political parties must have about the fact that we do need a framework that will govern how these coalitions are managed. Otherwise, if you had to ask all of us to show you our coalition agreements, you will see that everyone was because as much as this is not a new phenomenon, everyone was just trying their own things. You get a 2-pager there, 10-page there, and so on and so on. But also the substance that constitute this coalition agreement was rather, problematic. So we would like a situation where at the policy level, we work hard enough to make sure that we establish a framework which eventually is going to be legislated so that whoever who enters into a college, it must not be easy. Listening to Comrade Trolley blaming the late Bopane now, one can only think about what would have been happening, what were they planning at night that they couldn't face the people of Nelson Mandela and tell them. And now that is no longer here to answer, we hear that he was only interested in contract. So those things naturally happen if you have got underhand dealings, and I say that it will be important, therefore, that we look into those things. Now, the other critical issue is that coalitions must establish the accountability platforms. These must include regular meetings, both at the level of council, but also at the level of parties, so that we are able to find each other in the interest of ensuring that we run government. The other critical aspect in our case was the regular consultation. Engage all partners before critical decisions are taken. This, in my view, is one of the most critical aspects that must never be overlooked. There is no big brother approach in the coalition, because you all need each other to form a government that is going to work. Now, many of the unwritten agreements must be legal. It must not be things that you cannot be able to face the public with. So those are the things that guided us in terms of how we're able to pull together our own coalition government, but also at all times engaging each other as parties, as councillors, and to just keep it other intact. Now, the last point I want to raise is that in our case, we needed 3 seats to govern. We got 4 from the 4 parties you've mentioned, but we kept the executive to the African National Congress. We kept the legislature to the African National Congress, and then we allowed the coalition partners to do oversight so that we're always in checks. Thirdly, how we constituted the administration, it was the ANC-led coalition actually took responsibility. As a result of that, our administration has been stable. The city manager has been there for 5 years. The CFO, there were issues of declaration, which she couldn't be there, but relatively we've been stable. All the HODs, all the 23 HODs are still in place, and so on and so on. There would have been 1 or 2 instances where we had to act against the senior manager, and we were able to do so. So these are the things that, in my view and collective view, and I was listening to some of the colleagues today in the conference I'm attending, that it looks like voters will have to understand that the parties will have to talk on the basis of ideologies, but also on the basis of agreements that they are able to put together. But it must not be easy for political parties to just chop and change these coalition agreements. So I think for me, this is the contribution I can make to this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Mastina. I think we can all draw some lessons from that. Maybe some of our panelists don't necessarily agree, but I mean, that's, I suppose, the whole point of a dialogue. I would like to just remind you all that those who are participating, we have 25 books authored by Jolene Steyn-Kotzer, called Delivering an Elusive Dream of Democracy, Lessons from Nelson Mandela Bay. Our team will reach out to our 25 lucky recipients of the book, and we'll make contact for you to come out and fetch the books from us. For those who are just joining us now, I'd like to just mention that we are watching the Herald and Nelson Mandela University Community Dialogue, and we are discussing coalition governments. I would like to just quickly go over to the questions that we've received quite a few questions. I'm noticing even on the Facebook comment section. Some of the questions, are ones that we can answer. Dirk, for us in NMBM, what constitutes a majority in order to pass a budget, for instance? Is that literally 61 votes out of 120? Yes. It is. And then we've got a question from Marco. Mr. Trollope, with you as leader of the DA in 2016, the DA did great. Do you think the new leadership will do better with the upcoming election? Ethel, over to you.
Thank you very much, Roline and Rochelle, and thank Marco for the question and the compliment at the same time. Look, I believe that the DA, during my time in government, showed that we could govern Nelson Mandela Bay infinitely better than any of the other parties that, well, certainly better than the ANC that had been in government for the past number of years. I believe that a coalition is probably the future for Nelson Mandela Bay, and that a coalition would govern better. I just wanted to make a comment about what Mr. Matiwane said. I was watching Lance's face while Mr. Matiwane was talking, and he was, had as much disbelief as I did. I don't know which coalition Mr. Matiwane was talking about, but it certainly wasn't the DA coalition or DA-led coalition that first governed Nelson Mandela Bay from 2016 to 2018. Because during that time, we had the best capital and operational expenditure of all the metros in South Africa. Money in our bank account was better than it had ever been before. Lance's department won some national awards for what they'd been doing with cleaning up the city. And then there was a coalition of chaos. I mean, talking about a principle about how you put coalitions together. There was a coalition with Bobani, the EFF, and the ANC, where the municipality descended into absolute chaos. Instead of getting windfall grant funding from Treasury for spending the operational expenditure, Nelson Mandela Bay municipality had to forfeit equitable share. So Mr. Matiwane mustn't come and tell stories here in this debate. He was talking about the coalition of corruption and chaos, where the UDM, the ANC, and the EFF were in government, not the coalition where the DA, the ACDP, COPE, and the UDM were in government. So really, we must just let's not allow the facts to get in the way of a good story here. Let's just talk facts when we're talking about performance. We're no longer in government, or I'm no longer in government, so I've got nothing to achieve here. I do think that coalitions can work, and I do want to say one other thing. When I was the mayor, and a number of people have referred to it, and Mr. Masina is the executive mayor. The executive mayor in the legislation in this country governing local government has to have the final decision. I was the one who fired Mr. Bobani because the UDM wouldn't take any steps against him and all his infractions against our coalition agreement. I fired him. I couldn't fire him as the deputy mayor because he'd been elected by council. So, Lance is an attorney. He knows that in firms of attorneys, you have partnerships, you have senior partners, you have junior partners, and those firms work. Doesn't matter, whether you're a junior partner or senior partner, there is status in partnerships, and partnerships can work. But I just want to say that I think that principle and political ideological alignment is very important to make a government work. I wasn't prepared to go along to get along and to suffer Mr. Bobani's antics. I'd made certain campaign promises that we weren't going to be corrupt. So I couldn't turn a blind eye to Mr. Bobani's corruption, and I wasn't prepared to go along to get along. And when we finally pulled the trigger on Mr. Bobani, I know that I had Lance's support, and it meant that we would go out of government. Because here's another example of real commitment to a coalition, if I could use Lance as an example. When we were negotiating this coalition, I said to Lance, I can only have 10 people on my mayoral committee, and there isn't a position for you on the mayoral committee. Are you prepared to take the position of the Public Accounts Committee? And he said, yes, I am. To me, that was real commitment. It wasn't about a position. It wasn't about a demand for a deputy mayoral post. He said, yes, I'll do that. And if you have that kind of commitment to making a coalition work, it can work. But as soon as it's about power and patronage, then everybody loses. Now, Mr. Masina was talking about, Mr. Matiwane was talking about Nelson Mandela Bay, a municipality. Well, look at the municipalities in the Eastern Cape. They're a disgrace. They're a disgrace. They're all falling apart. Our neighbor, if you can look at Makanda and Sunday's River, and you compare that with what's happening in Kofa, he mustn't come and talk stories about the poor governance in Nelson Mandela Bay when all about us in this province, things are falling apart. So I believe that there is a future, Marco, a long response to a very short question. I believe there is a better future for Nelson Mandela Bay. I think it will probably be governed again in a coalition. And if we learn the lessons, the very painful lessons that we learned in the last 5 years, and don't make the same mistakes again, pick your partners wisely and make sure that every single partner will be held to every single provision in the coalition agreement, I think Nelson Mandela Bay can work perfectly again.
Thanks for that, Ethel. I'd like to just also bring up another, I suppose it would be a comment really. It says the ACDP had a councillor from 2011 to 2016 who sat at the back of council for 5 years and said and did nothing. That was before your time, Lance. A threshold would create stronger coalitions and reduce the risk of one-seat parties who become kingmakers and destabilize the government. Maybe I could just bring you in here, Lance. Look, it's referring to your predecessor, but what are your thoughts on that?
Michelle, to be honest with you, I can't talk for my predecessor. I think one of the reasons why we got rid of him is because he was doing nothing. And I think ACDP in our region was not on the, it was different leadership. Now, there's a different leader, you know, and I'm leading our region now. So obviously it is quite different. And like I said, I can't speak for him under that time, you know. I can only say for when I mean, remember, Michelle, I left my practice where I was practicing law to get into politics. And I didn't come here for a salary. I came here because I was passionate of making a difference in my community. And that is still what fuels me every day. So I can't speak for my other, my predecessor, but I can say, you know, what drives me is making a difference and serving people and putting them first. And I think that's why when Ethel even said, when he said public, public accounts committee, for me, it doesn't matter if it will make a difference to our city, holding people accountable, improving governance, no matter who gets the credit. To me, it wasn't important. To me, it was the credit was for the residents. If they get the credit, I'm happy I can sleep tonight. And for me, that's what it's all about. And it's still all about that. It's not who gets the credit. To me, the credit goes to the residents, and they should get the services that they deserve. And I think that's why it was working for us as a coalition, for Ethel, them, ourselves, you know, because that was what we wanted to do. We wanted to put the people first. We wanted to serve the people and give them, you know, what they've been longing for, because they've never seen something like this under an ANC government. And they got a taste of that. And we hope, you know, in this election coming that we will better improve this and put the people first. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Lance. There's just another comment here. After witnessing the administrations of Trolla, Kobani, and Banga, it's clear the model of coalition governance is not the problem, but the principles which coalitions agree upon. I think we all have heard you say, mention this today, but I'd really like to just bring Thabo into that here. You also touched on it, and you said that you didn't believe that there was a specific principle upon which the first coalition was built upon in 2016.
Yeah. Well, I say thank you very much. My contention remains that the coalition that was established from the point of view of the committee in Bisho and the Executive Council, it was never based on principles. And just to illustrate the point, forget about the mantra which was sold to everybody to believe in by the coalition partners and the DA in particular. There were certain concessions that the DA made, which in our view as the committee were very blunderous to appease the FF's demands. One of those is the issue of which has become very chronic in the city, the issue of land occupation and the proliferation of illegal settlements across those illegal occupied land parcels. The other point is that based on that lack of principled coalition, the coalition was itself very weak. It was dependent on the city hall, truly being the driver of that. The smaller parties were on a perpetual blackmail because they felt they were not being recognized. The other point, which I think I should make to illustrate this point, one of the biggest service delivery blunders the coalition made, which we are aware in Bishop, is the Milongwe waste management contract. And it happened during this coalition. There are people who have been arrested, they are still being arrested now on the basis of that biggest blunder of service delivery. The other point is Mayor Jordan launched a card ribbon for a Red Location Museum. This coalition killed it. Today, Red Location Museum with its significance is no longer there. The other point, which I think I must make to illustrate that it was never based on principle. One of the things that the DA said is going to do within the coalition was that they're going to be the first to launch many entrepreneurship zones. That never happened. They will create what is called a job zone. It never happened. They will create what is called infrastructure detection and monitoring teams. Again, it never happened. Anti-drug teams, it never happened. The rest is history. They say they will never pay as a coalition handshake against the former party that was ruling this council. They will never pay a handshake. What happened, Rochelle? They paid the biggest handshake ever. They paid the best administrator of the CFO of the Nelson Mandela Development Agency, a golden 2 million. Let him go off the best administrator in that agency. They also put the CFO of the seat on suspension for the longest time. So the point is that I'm not one of those as the chair of the portfolio committee that is going to buy the mantra which was there before the last point. I'm not sure if Mr. Trolley is referring to the Kocha we know. The roads are badly not maintained in Kocha.
Ethel, would you like to respond to
the
that?
biggest thing that they are doing, they've got what is called the biggest thing.
I'd really like to respond to that. You know,
yeah. Would you like to come in here?
I'd love to respond to that. And I realized today how much I've missed politics. Because when somebody is talking nonsense who holds a political position responsible for local government, then he must be called out. I want to call Mr. Matiwane out. First of all, if he talks about principle...
I've never said no.
Look, Rochelle, can I have some protection?
Sorry, Tabo,
No, I've never said
your line is a bit bad there.
You must talk with respect.
Colleagues, if we can just get back into
I've never said nonsense to him.
Tabo, if you can just mute yourself, let Mr. Trollop would like to respond to what you had to say. And colleagues, can we please respect each other? Thank you.
Rochelle, thank you very much. You know, when Mr. Matiwane says that the original coalition in Nelson Mandela Bay wasn't formed on principle, I wonder how he'd define the coalition that was formed on the 4th of December, 2018, when Mr. Bobani and Mr. Andile Lungisa cobbled their coalition together and they handed out a drain cleaning tender for 40 million rand, where people were not paid and the money disappeared. And the very next month, 21 people were assassinated. No mention of that. That was a coalition cobbled together around greed, not any principle of good governance. And for Mr. Matiwane, and please, Lance, you have to come in here, for Mr. Matiwane to even mention red location, he must really have a very thick skin. Because if you take a picture of what red location looks like today and what it looked like at its inception, and you realize that that facility that was paid for with international funding and government funding was built for the very best reasons and is one of the most superb museums I've ever seen. It resides in an ANC ward under Councillor Mtati. When I was the mayor, we had no less than 13 community engagements. And the reason why that location was never opened and why it was eventually stripped completely was because the people who live in that ward were built 40 square meter houses by the ANC-led government. And then the new RDP houses were 48 square meters. And the people in that ward said that red location would not open until they were built 48 square meter houses. And that is the reason why red location is no more. It has nothing to do with what our coalition government did. Mr. Metler knows himself the efforts that we put in to open that museum, because the only way to look after a facility like that is when it is open and run by the community for the community. The ANC allowed it to be closed. They endured its closure for more than a decade, and they are responsible for what it looks like now. I want to conclude by saying that, you know, all these stories, if they're not nonsense, they are fables and stories, are going to be punished in the next election, because voters have finally come to their senses that you can't forever make promises and leave them unfulfilled one election after the other. So if Mr. Matiwani doesn't like me calling them nonsense, his fables are going to be punished in the next election.
Well, things are certainly heating up here. Jolene, you would like to just come in here and talk about matters of trust and participatory democracy?
Yeah, I think, you know, that part of our coalition dynamic, and also we do have to bear in mind what the socio-political mood in the country is. We are in a space where only 32% of South Africans have democratic satisfaction and feel that our democracy is working. Only 28% of South Africans actually trust local government. Of South Africans, only 17% trust politicians. And then we also need to start looking around, you know, to what extent South Africans consider the vote as meaningful, and that is only 49%. 53% of South Africans believe that municipalities do not consult with them enough. And when you start taking those numbers into consideration, low levels of democratic satisfaction, low levels of economic satisfaction, extremely low levels of trust, governments not delivering on their promises, that is a key perception. Only 33% of South Africans believe that government is indeed delivering on the promise of services. Only 34% of South Africans believe that their municipality treats them with respect. And these are the lived realities of South Africans. And then we also need to start, and I think it's important for political parties moving into a local government election with the very strong possibility of coalitions, how political parties engage one another, and more importantly, how political parties construct each other. Because what we often find, and also within a coalition environment, is that there is already a almost campaign historic adversarial relationship where one's political opponent is almost painted as the proverbial enemy that must be annihilated at all costs. And following that political rhetoric and that political narrative, then of course going into some sort of coalition that needs to be on collaboration, consultation, agreement, basic principles of participatory democracy, it then becomes very, very difficult. And I wonder to what extent the political narrative we see coming from political parties also works to influence largely negative perceptions around political parties and politicians' trust and participatory democracy.
Thanks for that, Jo. We are nearing the end of our discussion. It's moved by very quickly, and I think we could definitely use another hour really to keep going. But I'd like to just bring Mr. Metler in here. If you could perhaps speak and draw lessons from your experience as a civil servant, particularly with running an administration that had a coalition government. What, in your opinion, would you say is the key stipulation that parties should state up front when entering into a coalition? And I ask specifically because ultimately it's the administration that's got to get things done on the ground. What, in your opinion, is the key stipulation that should be discussed up front? and agree to when entering into a coalition. Johan?
Okay, thanks, Rochelle. Rochelle, you know, if it was even possible to legislate good faith, I think one would go a long way. But that is in short supply, and you can just look at everyday politics. But you know, I really don't want to go there for obvious reasons. It's not my terrain. My job is to get things done. However, I do have a view with regard to the kind of political system that should suit a situation where there is not a clear majority. And I want to be clear that when the Structures Act was drafted way back in 1998, and I was still a researcher, the idea really was that the executive mayoral system is one where there's a majority. You put your MACO together. The MACO is not a committee of council; it's a committee of the mayor, and it is intended for rapid service delivery, right? Now we have a different reality that is busy unfolding, and it's a kind of a reality where I say, look, clearly one is now talking about minorities, but surely a proportionality system should cut the deal. And why I'm saying that is because already in our legislation there is provision for an executive committee system. But in order for an executive committee system to work, it is the job of the MEC in the province to say, in this particular province, this is the menu of governance systems. And in most provinces, except for KZN, it's the full menu. And so obviously there would then be a move towards the executive mayoral system. But in an EXCO system, you would have what is now referred to as a grand coalition, if you want to talk in coalition terms. But we would have the bigger parties making up the bigger majority of that executive committee, and they would have to. There are rules in terms of proportionality, and there may be one or two of the smaller parties that may find a way into into a system like that. And I think it's really something that should be explored at least. And the reason I'm saying it should be explored is because it forces the big players, those who have attracted the most votes, up to 85% of the vote, to actually sit together, because they both have skin in this game now. They both have to make it work. It is not in the interest of either of those two parties to collapse a council meeting or to collapse an EXCO meeting. You have to get the budget through. You represent 85% of the electorate. How more democratic is that? How accountable is that? You know, so I come from a completely different perspective. I see that also as a governance system that promotes stability, because I don't, as an administrator, that for me is gold. If I can have, if I don't have to worry about where the meeting is going to sit, whether these items will go through, it means that governance becomes predictable. And then I can go turn to my co-officials and say, this is how we are going to make this work. This is how we're going to improve on our delivery. This is how we are going to ensure that the plan and the budget gets implemented to the hilt, that we actually spend our 95% plus of our capital budget. So for me, I come from that perspective, and it's, it may not sound palatable, but I do think that there is a current system and it can work. Thank you, Rochelle.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Johan, for that. And I think ultimately what we can all agree upon from everyone that's been speaking here today is the need for stability. and stability, political stability, because ultimately the goal is to ensure that the residents that elected, you all into power, and I'm talking about the politicians, that those service delivery goals are met, and ultimately the people receive it and feel it on the outside. I have to unfortunately wrap things up. It's been a very good, interesting discussion. I'd like to really just thank everyone who's participated. Before I hand over to my colleague Rodney Bussot from the Nelson Mandela University's Canrad department, I'd like to just say, I'd just like to bring up a couple of points that have come through. And I think ultimately, one is, which I mentioned, is the fact that, stability is desperately needed in local government. And legislating in good faith, as Mr. Mettler mentioned, that would be an ideal situation, but whether or not it can be achieved is unfortunately not something that can be decided upon at this stage. Ethel, you spoke about having principles and ideological alignment, and ultimately what Mr. Matiwane also mentioned was the matter of principles and deciding on the principles. And on that note, I'd like to just hand over to Rodney and thank you to everybody that has tuned in this afternoon to the Herald and Nelson Mandela University's Community Dialogue. Thank you. Over to you, Rodney.
Sorry for that. On behalf of the Nelson Mandela University and the Herald Community Dialogue series, I want to thank all the panelists or speakers that took really the time out to avail themselves to be part of this particular dialogue of ourselves. Also, thank you for your valuable contribution that was made. The event interesting and insightful, and this is much appreciated. As I've said earlier, this is not our first dialogue, and this was one of the much interactive dialogue that we have. Also, thank you to the viewers who was watching on different social media platforms. Their contributions through the questions is appreciated. And then finally, a huge thanks to the technical team of the Herald who worked behind the scenes to make the dialogue possible without interference. Thank you all again and keep safe.